It is 16 minutes past 4 and we'll have a second go. Dr. Mark Harwood, are you on the line?
I am this time, Mick. Good to hear from you again.
Awesome. Well, we've got a few different modes of communication going on at the moment. I know it's not rocket science, but I've got to get this board working properly. Everything changes when we do we've been operating out of our new studio at West Gosford over the weekend, which has been pretty exciting. And the first thing I had to do was change our main board in here from outside broadcast back to normal, so as I could get you properly then. But yes, great to have you back on again.
And it's good to be back, Mick. It really is. We enjoyed that session last week. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. Now, of course, last week we were talking a lot about the stars and I think long ages, those sorts of things. And I think we'll probably have a bit more of a chat about, the planets and the stars. And I asked everybody if, they have any questions today, particularly anything to do with the planets and the stars and even aliens, if they could just send us a text on 0401 949 949. Now, of course, we should also mention, Dr. Mark, you are a rocket scientist, but you've also written a few articles for creation.com, right?
Indeed, that's right. And if your listeners go to creation.com, it's an absolute goldmine of information on this whole topic of origins, information covering every topic related to it you could think of, including philosophy and the theology of it and many other such things. So it's a great resource, creation.com. Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Now, this week, what is our topic this week? What are we going to particularly focus on?
Well, I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about the amazing design of our planet that we live on and how different it is from other planets that astronomers are finding out in other parts of our Milky Way galaxy. Because I think it really points to the extraordinary design and the loving God that has created us and this world that we live on.
Yeah, well, every week just about we get more news that, they've pointed a telescope at another piece of sky and they say stuff like, there could be life out here. And they keep sort of pointing to, the fact that it's a particular colour, in which case there could be life there.
Yeah, that's right. And they're looking for traces of gases which could be produced by biological life, traces in the atmospheres and all those sorts of things. But, Mick, the reality is that our Earth is astonishingly well designed and well suited to support life. And it's quite amazing. In fact, it's often called a Goldilocks planet.
Yep.
Not just by Christians, but by secularists too, people who don't even believe there's a God. Because they recognise that it's just a fantastic accumulation of chance events, they think, that lead to such an ideally designed planet. And there's just a few of those things that, that maybe we could just touch on for the interest of your listeners.
Yeah, and I do have a question that I have to ask about the gases that you just mentioned a moment ago as well. Whilst these guys are pointing at these planets and saying, hey, it's got this certain colour, so it might have a certain gas, which means that there might be life. Have we discovered every gas that there is?
That's an interesting philosophical question, because if there was one we hadn't discovered, how would we know? But I guess you can be kind of pretty confident that physical chemists have got a good handle on things like the periodic table and what structures atoms and molecules can have. So I think we've got a pretty good idea of what is likely to be able to occur in nature. I'd be surprised if there are surprises in that area. But, it's interesting. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. It's about 78% nitrogen, only 21% oxygen, and just a tiny little trace, in fact, of carbon dioxide that we hear so much about 0.04%, in fact. Just a tiny amount. But that atmosphere is tremendously important. It only extends for about 100 kilometres above the surface of the Earth. So that's, a bit over about 1.5% of the radius of the Earth. So I like to draw the analogy with an apple. Our atmosphere is like the skin around an apple. It's about the same kind of relative dimensions. But of course, it's absolutely essential for life. And it's got the right amount of oxygen. If we had too much oxygen, the air would be dangerously combustible. If there wasn't enough, there wouldn't be enough for life to be able to thrive. So it's just an extraordinary balance, very delicate, and it's just amazing, if you like, evidence of there being a loving, designing God behind all of the creation.
Yes, and so little carbon dioxide. That's amazing.
Oh, so little. Absolutely, a tiny trace. And a lot more of it, in fact, is water vapour. And water vapour is a far more effective greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. Carbon dioxide is really quite, it's way less effective than water vapour. But carbon dioxide, of course, is plant food. And it's tremendously important that we have carbon dioxide to keep our plants thriving and healthy. And the plants produce oxygen from the carbon dioxide they absorb out of the air. And the oxygen, of course, is essential for us as well to be able to breathe.
Yeah.
So just the interaction between plants and living things, creatures that breathe, is in itself an amazing example of design.
Yeah. Wow. So, when we come back, we'll go on with a bit more of this, Dr. Mark. You're on 94.9. It is 23 minutes past 4. You're on 94.9. It's 26 minutes past 4. And we have Dr. Mark Harwood on the other end. He's on the phone line. He's from Creation Ministries International. Those guys have a website called creation.com with thousands of pages of information. They've got all sorts of questions and answers on there. But if you do have any questions for Dr. Mark, who is a rocket scientist, look, it's the easy way of explaining it, Dr. Mark. Send your questions through to us on our text line 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. Mark, you were talking about Earth being in this Goldilocks zone, and I understand what you were saying. I mean, things are just right. There's not too much oxygen. There's not too little oxygen. It's just right. Same goes with carbon dioxide and all the other bits. And yes, we start to complain when the carbon dioxide goes up by like a tiny weeny fraction, because everything it has to be just right. And if it's not just right, everything sort of falls apart. And I guess that's why people are complaining, because things are starting to change slightly. But that slight change is like point something of a percent, isn't it, in the carbon dioxide?
It is indeed. And in fact, the way our atmosphere and our climate is designed is really very stable. In fact, if you look back over Earth history, according to the Bible, there has been massive climate change, and the Earth has survived very, very comfortably. When God created the world, He did it in a way that everything was just magnificent. It could not have been any better. And so you have a lot of evidence of rich vegetation and plants. In fact, Adam and Eve were created to live naked on the planet, and you can't do that today without getting very cold or sunburned. So it must have been very different back then. But what happened then, of course, as we read in the book of Genesis, God judged the world because of the evil and the violence that had spread out across it. And He brought the global flood of Noah, and that totally changed the whole surface of the earth. And the climate went through a massive change, and the earth survived that. And here we are today. So it's not like our climate is unduly fragile. A lot of people think it is, but it's exceptionally well designed to be stable and to support life.
Yeah, and even those massive changes, though, there still would have only been a very small percentage. For instance, in the carbon dioxide, only a very small percentage change regardless, because the creation is so, Goldilocks zone, so perfect in many ways.
That's right, and it's been so well designed. I guess we don't know exactly what the conditions were like back then. We can only surmise. And when we look in the fossil record, we see evidence of gigantic leaves, like maple leaves and so on, and huge creatures that we find small versions of today. So it must have been an incredibly lush and rich and beautiful environment. Today, only about 28% or something, 22% rather, of the Earth's surface is dry land. 78% of it is water, so it's largely covered by water.
Yeah.
It probably was not like that before the flood, but this is how the surface of the earth has ended up as a result of the flood of Noah. So the earth has survived massive climate change in the past. I don't think Christians should be upset about things that are happening, but Christians should be at the forefront of caring for this earth that God has made for us. And so we should be, focused on looking after the world that God has made for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back to Dr. Mark Harwood after this break. And we have Dr. Mark on the line from Creation Ministries International. And Dr. Mark Harwood, of course, he was in charge of, sending Optus satellites into space. And so he's had his eyes on the heavens for many years.
That's
and
right.
You've been looking at, you've probably seen more stars than all of us, Dr. Mark, put together. And I mean, when you look up to the stars, there's a few planets I'm sure that you've seen, but do you ever get a good look at any other sort of planets other than inside our solar system?
Well, no, there are actually only 5 planets in our solar system that can be seen with the naked eye. With telescopes, of course, you can see them all. But finding planets orbiting other stars is something that astronomers have been doing now for, I guess, the last maybe 30 years. And it's absolutely amazing what's being discovered. Before they looked at planets orbiting other stars, astronomers just assumed that our solar system was just some common, ordinary, normal that would be typical of lots and lots of different solar systems. But what they're actually finding is that these other planets orbiting other stars are just nothing like our own. Our solar system is absolutely extraordinary. We have these rocky planets that are close in. The Earth is the third one of those. And then we have these gas giants that are much further out, like Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus and Neptune. And these are huge planets. And the planets that are seen to be orbiting other stars seem to fall into a number of different groups. Firstly, typically the planets are very, very similar. It's called the peas in a pod problem. Our solar system is not like that. The planets in our solar system are enormously different from each other. But around other stars, they all seem to be roughly the same. They're all rocky ones, or they're all gaseous ones.
Wow.
Some of the most dramatic ones are ones that planets that can be 20 times as big as our planet Jupiter, orbiting very closely to their host star, so that the orbit might only take 2 or 3 days or even down to hours to complete. And that speaks of an incredibly violent environment where the planet's being ripped apart by the gravitational forces and it's spiraling into the host star. So, it can't have been there very long. These are called hot Jupiters. And what that shows is that they were actually created quite recently. Those things haven't been happening for billions of years because they wouldn't be there now if that were the case.
Yeah, wow.
And then we find others. Yeah, it's just amazing. The environment that we live in is just so amazingly well designed, and to have happened by chance is quite ridiculous. In fact, one astronomer said, I'll just read you this quote because I think it's a good one. The discovery of thousands of star systems wildly different from our own has demolished ideas about how planets form. Astronomers are searching for a whole new theory. What that means, of course, is they haven't got a clue.
Yep.
Because every attempt to explain how stars and planets form naturally fails. There's just no workable solution. We hear a lot on TV documentaries and the like about how, it all just condensed out of a swirling cloud of dust and gas. But in fact, it doesn't work because the force of gravity is just too weak to overcome the pressure and the temperature of a collapsing gas cloud that would push it apart. So it's not going to form into a planet or a star. So the very existence of stars and planets is a complete mystery, and in fact, I think is an example of God's creative genius.
Yeah, well,
So
when you look up at the stars, you see how beautiful they are. It's quite obvious, isn't it?
It is, it truly is. And the fact that it defies explanation from a secular point of view that begins by assuming that there is no God just points to the truth of what the Bible says right at the beginning when it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And it's just amazing. And of course, he made an incredible planet for us to live on, and he made us in his own image so that he could be in relationship with us. So the creation speaks a great deal to us about God, about his character, and about his purpose in creating mankind. But when we listen to the evolutionary story, which tries to explain the universe without God, it leaves just an empty void. Are we really just cosmic accidents? I don't believe so. I think the creation points clearly to the fact that God is there, and God is a loving, purposeful God who created us in his image.
I saw something in the news just in the last couple of weeks, and they were talking about how the moon is very, very slowly moving away from Earth. Is that really the case?
Yes, it is. In fact, back in the Apollo missions, way back in the late 60s, early 70s, they left behind some corner reflectors. These are little prisms. They're a bit like the cat's eyes on roads when you're driving at night, and they reflect your headlights back to you.
Yep.
And these corner reflectors are on the surface of the moon, and so when scientists fire high-powered lasers at the moon, the light bounces back, and they can measure very accurately the distance between us and the moon.
Wow.
And it's actually retreating from us at the rate. Now you've got to get this. It's not real fast. It's 3.8 centimeters every year. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but it is actually spiraling outwards. And
but if we put that in the billions and billions of year basket, it would have come from the center of the Earth.
Well, in fact, it doesn't fit the billions of years. You're exactly right. Because if you wind that process backwards, then the maximum possible age that the Earth-Moon system could have is around 1.5 billion years, which is only about a third of what the claimed age is. And this is still a major problem in astronomy. There's no explanation for it. All sorts of stories get told, but no one really knows. But you know what? It actually fits the description made in Genesis, where God says that he created a greater light to rule the day and a lesser light, namely the moon, to rule the night. So the moon is in fact a created body. I think it's interesting when you look at the attempts to explain the origin of the moon in natural terms. People have come up with all kinds of ideas, but there is no theory that really explains it. So we can't even explain the existence of the closest astronomical body to us, namely the moon, in natural terms. I think the reason is because its origin is supernatural, not just natural.
Absolutely. Something else that was in the media about a week ago, and that was someone was looking at photographs taken by one of the rovers up on Mars, and they found something up there that looked like a duck.
Oh yeah, that's right. I saw that. Yeah, all these various shaped things in rocks, and there are all kinds of fanciful suggestions made. But no, it's a rock.
Okay, so it wasn't a duck that sort of solidified over time. No, okay. I just had to check that.
And in fact, they've found early images from telescopes of Mars thought that there was a huge pyramid there. And then they decided maybe there was a face on Mars, but subsequent measurements turned out there's just shadows cast by a mountain.
It's interesting how so many people look at the shadows and they've come up with so many things, but at the end of the day, when they get a closer look, they're just rocks.
Yeah, the signposts that are pointing to the existence of the Creator God are really so clear. People just have to turn handsprings to try and deny that this universe was created. And, I think they do it deliberately, Mick. They really don't want there to be a God. And so they try and find any kind of naturalistic explanation they possibly can. They just tries to explain him away. But that's kind of a bit silly, really, because if God exists, you really need to come to terms with that. And because one day you might be standing before him to give account for how you've lived your life. And I hope that every one of your listeners here today has concluded that indeed there is a creator God. And, the best thing is he's made it possible for us to be able to live in a way that is in relationship with him. Because he's opened the door through his son, Jesus. And that is the Christian gospel message.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Mark, we quite often, when we're having conversations with people, they'll say, well, look, if they find life on another planet, that doesn't discount God. It just means God made some life somewhere else. What have you got to say to those people?
Well, first of all, there's absolutely no evidence of life anywhere outside of this planet, in spite of all the hype and the things that you might hear. Remember, in Genesis, it says that the objective God had was to make the earth as a home for man and to make man in his image. And he made the creation replete with all forms of living things, but man alone is made in God's image. Now, if there were beings that were able to be like us, be self-aware on other planets, then we have a problem because the whole of the universe is suffering under the curse because of Adam's sin. And everything is running down. We notice that all throughout the universe, obviously here on our planet, things wear out, they break down. Ultimately, death is a consequence of sin, and it affects every part of creation. So that would mean that some sentient beings on another planet would be now subject to suffering and death because of the actions of some bloke called Adam on a distant planet they'd never heard of.
Yeah. And
that would be most unjust of God to inflict such a thing on people. So just from a purely theological point of view, I don't believe there is any life away from this planet. But apart from that, scientifically, there is absolutely no evidence of anything. The reason people are searching for life out there is because they believe life accidentally arose on this planet. But if people look into the probability of inanimate chemicals somehow forming themselves into the first self-replicating cell for life to begin on Earth, it's fantastically unlikely or improbable. Indeed, so fantastic that I would have to say it's simply impossible.
Yeah.
So life can't come about by natural processes. Life only begets life, and God spoke life into being on this planet.
Yeah, and I guess there's more and more evidence all the time. The further they put a telescope out, there's more evidence to say there isn't life out there rather than there is.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's right. But the more they try and interpret it and think, maybe there's life here, and maybe there might be life under the ice on this planet, or maybe this moon, or something like that. But absolutely no evidence of it. I don't believe there will be any form of sentience that is thinking life elsewhere. Maybe someone might find a microbe somewhere, but that's even that is incredibly unlikely. I'd be surprised, but that wouldn't change anything that the Scripture says. But certainly there is no sentient life anywhere other than on planet Earth.
Yes, I mean, it's probably becoming more likely that they'll find a microbe on Mars because we've sent so many things there that could potentially have one on it.
That's exactly right. We could well have contaminated it. Yeah, very true.
Yes, all right. Well, Dr. Mark, it was a pleasure having you again. It is awesome every time we speak to you. I believe we're speaking to you again next week. Is that correct?
That's right. It's in my calendar. I'm looking forward to it, Nick.
Absolutely. And of course, anybody with questions can send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. And we're really looking forward to it. Dr. Mark Harwood from Creation Ministries International, our resident rocket scientist. And I thank you so much again, Dr. Mark.
Thank you, Mick. Good to be on the program.